We had numerous murders and assaults, and they kept getting more serious and closer. Abducted in front of her house in her car, taken out into the country, and they both raped her. And once I arrested Anthony Cook, there was no more serial killer, you know, it was over.
He's been convicted of 2 aggravated murders, kidnapping, rape, but he confessed to 9. You know, he was responsible for much more than what he pled to, but we made a deal so that those people in that case had closure.
The double shooting took place here, just a quarter of a mile from the Ottawa Hills Police Department.
This guy will never stop killing.
At gunpoint, he tied up 21-year-old Todd Szabo and forced Miss Sawicki into the back of the van, threatening to rape her.
Talk about when you first met Anthony Cook.
Cold, show no emotion. He was a psychopathic killer, you know. He didn't have any feeling, you know, about killing. He enjoyed it.
Everything that we learned up till the other day was Anthony Cook is in jail for the rest of his life. I can't see him getting out. I don't think he'll get out.
I told him this guy tried to rape me, and he's with my boyfriend, and he's got a gun.
But I cannot imagine anybody that's admitted to doing the things he's done could ever walk our streets again.
We didn't have the death penalty back then. He didn't get the death penalty. We didn't have life without parole then, so he didn't get life without parole. And I don't think that that is a person that any parole board is going to say, you're rehabilitated, you go on back out to the community and have yourself a nice life. I don't think that will ever happen.
Have you or could you ever forgive Anthony Cook for what he took from your family?
I hope he rots in hell. You know, he's going to pay for his crimes one way or another, and if he feels like he's paid for him now, wait till the next life.
Welcome to WTOL 11 Plus. I'm Melissa Andrews here with lead investigator Brian Duggar. Welcome to WTOL 11 Plus, where we can take a deeper look into the investigations you see on WTOL 11. And today, as you saw, we're talking about the Cook brothers, 2 of Toledo's most prolific serial killers.
And this story is actually coming up again because Anthony Cook is actually going to be having a parole hearing on December 5th. So starting back in May of 1980, the Cook brothers, and we're talking about Anthony and Nathaniel, they terrorized the streets of Toledo. At least 9 people were killed, and we actually believe that number might be significantly higher because they were long-distance truckers.
But in Toledo, they mostly attacked young white couples. Why? Because when Anthony was in prison in the 1970s, he said white guards mistreated them, and he was very vocal about his hatred of whites. Here's a look back at that crime wave.
The viciousness of the murders and the pattern, so many of them, so brutal. Such young people. I remember everything vividly, all the murders and everything. And the Bacchus girl, you know, the little 12-year-old that was killed at the State Theater. You know, I wake up sometimes with a nightmare with her. After all these years, every once in a while I still do.
40 years ago, darkness descended over the streets of Toledo. Over a 16-month period, 2 serial killers, brothers Anthony and Nathaniel Cook, terrorized the city. They stalked their victims late at night.
So there was a lot of conversation among law enforcement and the community. The community was very, very concerned. You know, would they be next?
10 people were killed. Others were victimized but survived.
I just hear those words over, and just the idea of telling me to get undressed and just the different things that they said, it still sticks through my mind.
On May 14, 1980, Sandra Pogorski and Tommy Gordon were sitting in his car on Utica Street. Nathaniel Cook smashed in the passenger window, and the brothers forced their way into the car. They were driven to a remote location in western Lucas County. It was just the start of the brothers' rampage.
When you see the crime scenes, and you don't really forget those things.
Retired police detective Frank Stiles hunted the men from one crime scene to the next.
Got to the point where I dreaded to go to work because I knew it was my job to catch them. And I wasn't doing my job. And I felt that way. And when I go to work and I thought, oh my God, there's going to be another murder I have to deal with.
Beginning in January 1981, the attacks came with increasing regularity. On January 17, Connie Thompson's body was found in a Langendorfer Bancroft culvert. Just 10 days later, Cheryl Bartlett and her boyfriend, Bud Coates, were abducted. The night before, Bartlett had a premonition that she would be raped and shot. She told her mom of that disturbing dream.
She said, stay in the house, do not go out. This is a bad neighborhood, because we lived on the south end. And here I was 18 years old, and I thought I could do it. And I walked up to Kroger's by myself. Everything was fine. On the way back, my heart started racing. It's like something's telling me something's gonna happen, and then it did.
Cheryl and Bud were taken into a garage. Cheryl was raped and a bullet was fired into her back.
When they shot, I started screaming. They ran, and then when we ran to the front of the house, I thought I was gone.
But she survived. Few people survived the Cooks.
Tony Cook didn't plan on anybody surviving. He didn't care if they saw him because he was going to kill him anyways.
But the brothers' depravity and viciousness shocked the city a few weeks later. 12-year-old Dawn Backus was found raped and murdered in the basement of the former State Theater on Collingwood Boulevard.
It's just what that little girl went through. I mean, all these are vicious, horrible crimes, even the ones that survived.
The slimy creatures of the earth that took my most precious gift from God, they need flushed down the gutter. That would even be too mild.
Dawn's mother, Sharon, spoke out strongly against the men before their sentencing.
Guilty pleas to all 3 of those counts.
She now keeps a landline in her home, awaiting a call about the death of the Cook brothers. I want the public to be aware of what kind of monsters are walking the face of the earth.
You really got to be demented and hateful to torture people like they did.
Today, Nathaniel walks the streets of Toledo as a free man. The brothers cut a deal in 2000. In exchange for confessions to all their murders in Lucas County, Nathaniel was freed in 2018. He's on Ohio's sex offender registry.
Hey, Nathaniel.
He refused to go on camera, but he told me that life is not going that well for him. When asked if he wanted to apologize, he simply said, "I just want to go on with my life." Anthony is eligible for parole in 2024, but he will likely die in prison. Before being in prison, Anthony was suspected of 11 rapes and 11 killings. His brother has been linked to 4 murders and 4 rapes. But police believe that there may be many more victims.
You know, I've never gotten over this case. Other cases I've been able to walk away from them after a while, even some of the heinous ones. But this case is, you know, haunted me for 40 years.
Now that story is from 2020, and we did it to mark the 40-year anniversary of the start of the Cook's killing spree. But I actually spent a lot of time with family members and also one of the Cook survivors. So we wanted to give them their own story because they all are really remarkable people. So take a look. The Terrace View Apartments. The final scene in one of Toledo's darkest chapters. On September 18, 1981, serial killer Anthony Cook murdered Peter Sawicki. He shot Todd Sabo. He attempted to rape Todd's girlfriend, Leslie Sawicki.
Truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth as you should. We got it.
Cook is suspected of killing 10 people. His brother Nathaniel likely helped him with 4 of those executions.
I told him this guy tried to rape me, and he's with my boyfriend, and he's got a gun.
Testimony by Leslie Sawicki and Todd Sabo helped stop the killers. Are you able to forgive Anthony and Nathaniel?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. You know, forgiveness is, you know, it's the key. It's the key to our faith. You know, Jesus died on the cross for the forgiveness of our sins. So forgiveness is everything.
Survivors, family members. They are strong, resilient, even hopeful. 40 years, healing happens, but pain never goes away completely.
You know, I have kids now, which I didn't have back then, but it's one of them things that they never knew their uncle. Saw pictures on the wall.
Scott Moulton was shot to death in the trunk of a car alongside Denise Siotkowski. For 16 months, the Cook brothers stalked couples on the streets of Toledo. The city's nights were filled with terror.
He told my boyfriend at the time to hold me tight because it was the last time he was ever going to hold us. And then I heard the gun go off.
A bullet tore into Cheryl Bartlett's back, forcing her to fight for her life inside a Seeger Avenue garage. She knows Nathaniel Cook is now walking free because of a plea deal. She's scared, but she's a survivor. 30 surgeries, a broken body, but not a broken spirit.
I just like to tell him that he may have done what he did to me when I was 18, and I was a victim. I'm not no victim no more.
A little more than 3 months after a bullet traveled through his neck into his brain, Todd Sabo returned to the wrestling mat at the University of Toledo. He finished second in the conference in his junior year. A broken spirit, but not a broken body.
I'm a wrestler, you know what I mean? And we're taught when, you know, any athlete or any person in the world pretty much, you know, we're taught to fight back. We're taught to, you know, the world says get even.
He conquered the physical pain, but not the emotional demons, until, he says, he found God 15 years ago. That relationship has given him the ability to offer forgiveness.
A world without forgiveness is a world of constant revenge and retribution. We don't like the idea that someone can do something horrible and be let off the hook until we realize we're horrible and we've been let off the hook.
But he understands that others will never forgive the Cook brothers. 12-year-old Dawn Backus was found in the basement of the now demolished State Theater. She was raped and murdered.
The slimy creatures of the earth that took my most precious gift from God, they need flushed down the gutter.
The crime was so brutal that Dawn's mother, Sharon, will never release the hate in her heart. She keeps a landline, awaiting a call that the Cooks have died or that they've been killed. Every single day, she remembers the girl who would not walk on her neighbor's lawns because she didn't want to be disrespectful. She was so happy and pleasant. She said her prayers every night, asking God to bless all the people and the animals in the world. The murders changed families forever. Steve Moulton grew up without his brother. He worked hard to make sure he wouldn't lose others.
My wife going to the grocery store, kids going out and making sure, we knew where they were at, things like that. We probably were extra cautious, but they understood. Yeah. Might not have liked it all the time, but they understood.
For Cheryl, her family was her salvation. She says that her husband is her rock. He comforts her when the nightmares come, and they will probably always come. But she wants to make it clear that she is not weak.
I have a scar from the middle of all the way going down to my stomach. And I look at it, and I may have been a victim at one time, but I'm a survivor now.
40 years ago, evil descended on the streets of Toledo. 40 years later, survivors have their hope, their strength. For family and friends, they will always have their memories.
She had big brown eyes that seemed to say, "The world is mine, I'm here today." So friendly, so gentle, so much fun to behold, yet quiet and caring and a heart full of gold. She entered our lives in her small way, that ever tender smile, her loving way. I thought to myself, if I have a true friend, never dreaming that it would so abruptly end. She was taken today, no answer as to why, we only know it left us to cry. The sorrow and grief we now have all felt, emptiness of meaning of what fate had dealt. God grants us the faith and the peace we need now, and strength to forgive and a way to show how. To what she gave, her life and her way, we'll hold in our hearts until our last day.
And that brings us to today. Now, a couple weeks ago, I got a text message from Steve Moulton. That's the brother of a murder victim, Scott. Now, he was texting me while a meeting was actually going on with the parole board. And he was really concerned because for the first time, he got the feeling that Anthony could actually get out of prison. So Prosecutor Julia Bates, retired Detective Frank Stiles, and Steve spent a lot of time talking to me about this story that we're going to show you right now.
I would tell him I hope he rots in hell.
He is somebody that probably should stay in jail until his last breath.
This guy will never stop killing.
This guy is Anthony Cook, likely the most prolific serial killer in Toledo history. By the time police caught him in 1981, Anthony killed 9 people, possibly many more. For more than a year, he and his brother, Nathaniel, terrorized the streets of Toledo.
He's the worst individual, human being I've ever seen, talked to, known, investigated. He is the worst.
I've been doing this job for 48 years. You know, I've not seen too many that are worse than Anthony Cook.
And on December 5th, the parole board could return him to his hometown.
We didn't have the death penalty back then, so they didn't get the death. He didn't get the death penalty. We didn't have life without parole then, so he didn't get life without parole. So he got a sentence that ended with life, but that it had a fixed amount of years, and so that allows him to be eligible for parole. It doesn't mean he'll get parole.
Earlier this month, Bates and family members met with parole board representatives. Every 10 years, a scab is pulled off, Cook has a hearing. But this time, it felt different for Steve Moulton, the brother of Scott Moulton, who was killed by Cook in 1981.
Everything that we learned up till the other day was Anthony Cook is in jail for the rest of his life, period. You know these parole hearings are going to come up because it's his right, but what we learned is that that's not 100% accurate.
Beginning in May of 1980, Anthony and Nathaniel Cook stalked couples who dared to be outside after dark.
He used different weapons to kill the people each time, trying to throw us off. Very careful about their fingerprints and that kind of thing, because we did have fingerprints back then, but we didn't have any DNA or anything we could work with.
Anthony abducted Scott Moulton and his friend, Denise Siotkowski, in March 1981. They were sitting in their car at an Oregon apartment. Anthony Cook raped Denise and shot them both.
I can't even fathom what my parents went through. To be, they were in a group, people are in PTA and they're sports boosters, Imagine yourself being in a group called Parents of Murdered Children.
Every murder was vicious, none more so than the killing of Dawn Backus. Anthony scooped up the 12-year-old girl off a street near Bancroft. He and Anthony took her to the abandoned State Theater, raped her, and killed her.
Now, it don't get much worse than that with a little 12-year-old. Pick her up off the street and to do that to her. So they were the most cold-blooded, especially Tony, of all. I've handled thousands. I've had a lot of murders, brutal murders. I've never seen anything like that. And, you know, I couldn't sleep at night. I got to the point where I hated to go to work when I was working on the series because I knew it was going to be another one.
Nathaniel then stopped killing Anthony Dent, taking at least 6 more lives without his brother. The spree stopped in the fall of 1981. Anthony Cook found Lisa Sawicki and Todd Sabo inside a van near the Ottawa Hills police station. He attacked and tied them up, but Todd got away and freed Leslie. She ran to a nearby apartment and called her father, Peter.
The double shooting took place here, just a quarter of a mile from the Ottawa Hills Police Department. In fact, the village police were one of the first notified about the attempted rape.
Peter Sawicki arrived before police, and Anthony shot and killed him, leaving Todd shot and wounded.
There was a small tree, and he pointed out to me a brown paper bag, and he said that the weapon that killed Mr. Sawicki was in that bag.
Police arrested Cook a month later after an informant reached out to former Detective Frank Stiles, who had a surprising conversation with the serial killer at the police station.
And he says, what do you think? He said, with all your experience, do you think that a guy that could do this kind of thing would ever be able to get out on parole?
I said, hurry, we have to call the police. I said, this man tried to rape me.
I know we got down to the ground. I can't recall exactly how we did.
In March of 1982, with Leslie and Todd testifying, a jury convicted Cook of Sawicki's murder. Shockingly, Anthony took the stand.
Did you see this on morning September 18, 1981?
Did I see it the morning of September 18, 1981?
Yes.
Yes.
Where'd you see it at?
I seen it in my car.
You saw this in your car?
Yes.
What was it doing in your car?
I had got with shot Sawicki.
Pardon?
I had shot Peter Sawicki.
For more than 15 years, police didn't know Cook's partner in his early crimes until Bates suggested using DNA. She learned about it at a conference where the Sam Shepard case was discussed.
I went to bed, and I tell you what, trite as it sounds, I woke up, it was 3 in the morning, and I just was wide awake, and I was like, wow, if they can do this in Cleveland with Sam Shepard, we can do this with the Cooks.
DNA from a previous rape matched Anthony, and it also matched his younger brother, Nathaniel. The Cooks cut a deal. Would tell you our victims, Nathaniel gets out in 20 years.
I picked up a pipe and hit her with the pipe. She fell.
On April 3rd, 2000, the brothers gave chilling details about their crimes.
If I tied anybody up, I always took the bindings away.
He would talk just like you and I are talking. Very cool, collect, cold, show no emotion. You know, he was a psychopathic killer. You know, he didn't have any feeling, you know, about killing. He enjoyed it. Tony Cook enjoys killing.
In 2018, Nathaniel Cook walked free. He lives in Toledo in the shadow of the old West End Academy.
You think, oh, 20 years, that's a really long time. He's going away. We'll never have to think about this again. And then all of a sudden, 20 years is up. And now he's coming home. It was very hard for them. It's hard for me. So we keep the pictures on the wall in the office so that we remember that we never forget.
Nathaniel's big brother could soon join him on the outside.
It would be ludicrous. It would break the barrier of common sense. And from that point of view now, I can't see him getting out.
He's just a cold-blooded murderer. If they would let him out on parole, it wouldn't be any time hardly he would kill somebody. There's not a question in my mind.
What's your message to the community? Is he going to get out?
Well, my message is, let's hope not. I don't think so. And it's everything that I believe. I've been doing this job for 48 years. You know, I've not seen too many that are worse than Anthony Cook. And those people are still locked up. And I think he probably will be as well. I'm fairly confident that that's what will happen.
If you could tell Anthony Cook anything, what would you tell him?
I would tell him I hope he rots in hell. He's going to pay for his crimes one way or another, and if he feels like he's paid for him now, wait till the next life.
So I'm going to ask you the first question that I know is on everyone's mind. How are we even sitting here having a conversation today about the possibility that a serial killer could be up for parole?
Yeah, and this was actually something, 4 years ago when I did that story for the first time. We just all assumed back then that there's no way this guy could ever get out of prison. And so when I was talking to, prosecutor Julia Bates the other day, she said, well, look, this was during a time window when there was no death penalty and there was no life in prison without parole. So they had to give him life in prison with the opportunity for parole. So that's what's happening at this point. Every 10 years, he gets a new parole hearing. And right now, I believe he's 76 years old. He got the parole hearing 10 years ago, 76 right now.
Also, this is not the first time that he's been up for parole.
He did 10 years ago, and at that point, they're like, yeah, there's no way he's getting out, but something feels different this time around to the family because he's a 76-year-old man. He hasn't done anything, horrible in prison. He seems to be behaving. So then it gets to the point that, well, we let him out, maybe he's not going to be a danger.
But Brian, the definition of serial killer is someone who repeats killing.
Yeah. And, when I talked to Frank Stiles, he told me that he believes that if Anthony Cook got out, that he would continue killing right away.
That would be the assumption by definition. Why do you think it does feel different? You mentioned that the brother of Steve feels that there's a real possibility here.
Yeah, so Steve was talking to one of the board members, and he said, and Steve went into this meeting thinking that, well, this is a slam dunk. We just have to do this 10 years.
Anyone would think that.
Yeah, we're just pulling the scab off. It's annoying, but he's never going to get out of prison. But the board member told him, it's like, look, we have to give Anthony a legitimate hearing this time around. And Ohio, for whatever reason, I have people reaching out to me all the time. They have been letting really bad people out of prison on parole. So, I actually talked to Julia Bates and, I asked her, I said, are you concerned that Anthony Cook will get out? And this is a clip that, about what she said. Are you concerned?
I'm not concerned. I'm not concerned. He could be the most model prisoner. I'm not saying that he is, but I'm saying he could be. But he's been convicted of 2 aggravated murders, kidnapping, rape, but he confessed to 9. And that's all part of this. And that is very horrific. And I don't think that that is a person that any parole board is going to say, you're rehabilitated. You go on back out to the community and have yourself a nice life. I don't think that will ever happen.
It's hard to believe that would ever happen. I want to clarify, okay, so they were convicted of 2 murders, confessed to 9, and they do believe they were able to corroborate that they committed the 9, or that he committed the 9, because the brother wasn't involved in all of them, right?
Yeah, Nathaniel Cook, we know was involved in 3 murders and a 4th attempted murder.
And he's out.
And
he's out.
Yes, he is out and living on West Central Avenue in Toledo.
Just so you know.
Yeah, so he got out, 5, 6, well, probably more than that, 8 years ago, I guess, at this point. But yeah.
he was not the mastermind of all these murders. He kind of went along with it, which doesn't really, let him off the hook by any means. But the real focus here was Anthony.
Yeah, absolutely, because we know that Anthony admitted to being involved with 9 murders. We believe there's 2 that he's definitely involved in, and one of them involved Detective Tom Ross's niece. And the belief is there that he wouldn't confess to that because he didn't want to be known as as strange as it sounds, a cop killer's, or a cop's like killer of one of a
he didn't want
yeah.
the police messing with him.
Yeah, he thought that people would have messed with him in prison if that was the case. And they also thought that maybe this was a stick in the eye to investigators who were chasing him. And so he just didn't want to admit to that.
So explain for people, because I have a hard time understanding 2. You're convicted of 2, you confessed to 9. Why are you not convicted of 9? What happened there?
Yeah, so they never took, again, 7 of those cases. The one that Anthony actually admitted to was back in 1973. We believe that was the first killing. And, you know, so, yeah, they didn't want to bring a lot of the victims or the survivors, because there were a couple of survivors.
Yeah.
They didn't want to bring them into court and make them go through this whole thing, the families go through this whole thing. And at that point, they weren't going to get a longer sentence than they already had gotten with those 2.
Which was life. But that has to factor into what the parole board's going to be considering, because it's not going to just be, oh, you were convicted of 2 and that's it. They get to know that they confessed to 9. That's going to be part of the discussion.
They have to know, and that would certainly, you would hope, that they would take that into consideration.
I think there would be a huge problem here in Toledo with people. People would have a problem with this if he did get out.
They'd have a huge problem. I mean, and the family members actually told me, I mean, they'd be scared. I mean, they've been speaking out with him, and in Nathaniel's case, every time he tries to get a job, you know, they're calling the employer and saying, hey, you don't want to hire this guy, he's a serial killer.
So it's been tough for him even being released anyway.
Yeah, so I mean, the family believes legitimately that they would probably be a target, and he does have a couple, 2 women that survived his attacks that obviously they would be terrified if he ever got out.
I asked you if this was unprecedented. Have there ever been, and you looked into it, have there ever been serial killers who've been let out on parole, and did they go back and do it again?
Yeah, you know, I was actually looking into this because because I wondered, is Nathaniel Cook the only serial killer in America who's ever been released on parole? But I was able to find 2 cases, and one of them was in Texas, and I forget where the other one was, California maybe, but both of them got out, and they both recommitted. I mean, murders. I mean, they murdered people. In the Texas case, can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was actually sent back to prison and executed for the murders he committed after he was paroled.
He reoffended. And I want to just be clear too about Julia Bates, because I think when you hear that these serial killers, one is out and one is up for parole, your mind might go to, well, was she somehow too lenient? But you're saying that she did all that she could at the time within the parameters of the law at that time.
Absolutely. And, you know, it was a gut-wrenching decision for her to, you know, have to do this, to make this deal so that Nathaniel Cook could get out. But this is the only way they truly believed that they could get the names of all the victims. And so she did what she had to do, and it still, I don't know that it haunts her, but she certainly thinks about it a lot.
Yeah, but you can see she's pretty confident that he will not get out. We have to talk about the families because they're the ones who've been going through this. It has to really bother them now all these years later. I thought it was pretty amazing how you were able to spend so much time with the family members over the years. How did you develop that relationship? And was there, a lot of times there's hesitancy to kind of bring up all these old wounds and expose themselves to the public.
Yeah, you know, I didn't really know what I would get when I first started looking into this. You know, Frank Stiles has been retired. He's 86 years old now, but he hasn't really talked about this case too much anymore. He used to talk about it quite a bit because everybody was fascinated by it. But, you know, we got him, and then he was still in touch with a lot of the family members, and you know, we began talking about who was around, and you know, I kind of tracked them down, and you know, a lot of what we do, as you know, is we try to build relationships with people, and I spent a lot of time on the phones talking to the family members and building this relationship. And one of the most interesting relationships that I was able to develop was with Cheryl Bartlett. Now, Cheryl and her boyfriend, Bud, were attacked by the Cook brothers, and they were central Toledo. They were taken down this alley into this empty house. I mean, she was raped. And then...
Was she the one that was shot in the back?
She was the one shot in the back because we believe at that point that the Cook brothers only had one bullet in their gun.
Or she would have been dead.
So they told her that, and we believe that Nathaniel was actually the one that said this, but that you should hug your boyfriend because it's going to be the last time you're ever going to hug him. And we believe that they were hoping that the bullet would go through her into him and kill them both. So, you know, I was able to find Cheryl. She'd never told her story before. I mean, you can imagine the trauma that she still has.
Hold on. Hold on. Let's go back to this bullet. So these two men were out on the streets of Toledo just searching for someone, knowing that they only had one bullet. That's how desperate they were to commit a murder right in that moment. That seems crazy to me.
I mean, the whole story seems crazy. I mean, as we, mentioned, I mean, they were actively stalking couples, particularly white couples, because Anthony hated white people, and all of his victims were white people. There's a 12-year-old little girl, but a lot of them were white couples. And yeah, I mean, we even know.
Very BTK-ish.
Yeah, and we even know there was one case where they pulled up behind this car that had a couple that was stopped at the train tracks because the train was going by, and they were right behind this car, and they considered getting out and attacking the couple and killing them. But for whatever reason, they decided against it. And those people survived that day.
It would be amazing to actually know what went through their minds, yet they're gonna, shoot these two people with one bullet, hoping it kills them both. Okay, so back to Cheryl. You talked to Cheryl, you've developed this relationship. She's gotta be fearful about this.
Yeah, I mean, she absolutely is. And I mean, she moved, out of state. I mean, she's haunted by the fact that, that Nathaniel is still out there in the streets of Toledo. But, another person I spent a lot of time with was Steve Moulton, the brother of Scott, who was killed with Denise Siotkowski. They were picked up in Oregon. They were sitting in a car next to an apartment, and I believe Anthony just came up and knocked on the window, and initially, Scott went and put down the window, and then he used the butt of a gun and really pounded on it, and he put it down, and he forced his way into the car, and then he ended up taking them to a remote location, raped Denise, and put both of them in the trunk of the car and shot them multiple times, and then he brought them back to this apartment building in Oregon, opened up the trunk, shot them some more because he wanted to make sure they didn't survive. So I spent a lot of time talking to Steve, and we actually have a clip from one of the clips from Steve.
Everything that we learned up till the other day was Anthony Cook is in jail for the rest of his life. Period. These parole hearings are going to come up because it's his right. But what we learned is that that's not 100% accurate. At least I think, and I don't want to get much into the legal stuff because that's a rabbit hole that it's not my world. But that they have to give Anthony, a worthwhile hearing.
So that's what we talked about a little bit earlier, is that he talked to the parole board, and or one of the members of the parole board, and that's what he said. But he said these hearings are going to be coming up because it's his right, but that's not 100% accurate. Do you know what he means by that?
I think I'm trying to remember back to the interview, but I think he was saying these hearings were going to come up, and it's just a formality that he's just going to stay in prison the rest of his life. But that's not 100% accurate. That the guy actually told him that there is a chance we have to give him a legitimate.
Which I can actually understand that. I mean, if you take away the circumstances of this case, I think the purpose of a hearing is to gather all the information, input from impacted people. We just talked about this Robert Jobe parole hearing that's coming up. You have to, it's not probably that they're fully, you know, don't have an opinion on this going through. These are human beings. They know the facts of the case, but I think they have to consider whatever's come up in the meantime, if he's done X, Y, and Z good things, but at the end of the day, the facts of the crimes probably outweigh some of those other things.
Yeah, and Mrs. Bates said, you know, earlier when we saw her, I mean, she said, you know, he could be a model
Right,
prisoner
exactly.
and do everything right. But I mean, his sins were so great that you just can't.
You can't overlook that. Frank Stiles, he's such a fascinating person. You mentioned that he used to talk about this quite a bit, not so much anymore. I find that interesting in itself. You've stayed in touch with him. Tell us about him as a person and as a detective. I mean, I think those of us who are not around for this can't even believe that this happened here in Toledo. That must have been, as he says, it was pretty traumatic for him.
Yeah, Frank actually, I've become good friends with him over the last several years, but Frank, you know, when this was all going on, I mean, he couldn't sleep. I mean, he wasn't sleeping, and he was terrified to go to work because he knew, I mean, these killings were grouped so closely together.
He knew someone else would be killed any time.
That night. I mean, he knew that they could be killed, but Frank is just this fascinating individual. He's 86 years old at this point and just as sharp as could be. I mean, he remembers every detail about this case. I mean, he lived it for, you know, the 17, 18 months that their killing spree lasted, but then through the trials and through the, you know, when Nathaniel actually went to prison back in 98, I mean, he lived this for decades. And, you know, he's just this really sharp guy who is, and he was like an old time cop, right? I mean, he would believe about going into the neighborhoods and building relationships with the guys on his beat. And he was all about getting confessions from people. So he had this amazing ability to talk to suspects and earn their trust and get them to confess. And he did everything by the book, the right way. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him.
One thing that I can't leave off the table is that you said that there's suspicion that these brothers, or at least Anthony, did more than the 9 killings. Does Frank have names in his mind that he thinks, and could those ever possibly be solved still?
Yeah, I mean, whether they can ever be solved, I mean, yes. I mean, he believes that there's probably at least 4 others
that he has in mind.
That he has in mind that they were probably involved in. And there's a couple others that Anthony likely attacked the person and they got away. In fact, the one couple, he actually showed up in their driveway and jumped in the car and was going to take them his usual mode, you know, kind of take them away and rape the woman,
shoot him in the
kill
trunk.
him.
Mm-hmm.
But that person's like brother or somebody came out on the porch and said, "Hey, you guys got to get in the house," and it kind of scared Anthony away. So, yeah, I mean, there's so many we don't know.
I would love for those to be solved, but that begs the question too: if he's going to confess to the 9, why not just confess to the other 4?
Well,
because the penalty wasn't going to get greater, as we already pointed out.
Right. I mean, this sounds crazy, right? But when they actually gave their confessions, it was in 1998, which was about 18 years after when their killing spree was going on. So I think that he forgot about all of the people he attacked. I mean, there were multiple women that he had raped that he wasn't quite sure about all the details. And you could see in the interrogation videos, which I actually did watch, at times he's kind of trying to recall these details, and I just think.
So maybe he even wanted to confess to more, but he just couldn't remember.
Right, and his attorneys, they only wanted them to confess to Lucas County. And Mrs. Bates told me an interesting anecdote the other day about, she said, well, at one point the attorney came up to me and said, does it just have to be Lucas County, or do they have to confess to all of the murders? And she's like, well, all of them, but why are you asking that question? But and they're like, oh, no reason. So, which certainly led her to believe that there's a lot more out there.
Obviously.
But I mean, you had asked about Frank recently, and I just sat down with him, you know, like last week, and I always enjoy spending time with him just because he's interesting, other than this case. But I spent an hour with him, and he actually gave us a little sound that I want you to listen to.
And he says, well, I can't ask you. He says, it's just a simple question. It's not a real. So I finally said, okay, I'll make this one exception. And he says, what do you think? He said, with all your experience, do you think that a guy that could do this kind of thing would ever be able to get out on parole? I said, well, it depends, you know. I mean, it depends on your record, how bad the cases are. So there's a lot of things that enter into that, and you I couldn't really give you an answer to that, but probably not. You know, you've done some pretty serious things.
So who was this that he was talking about?
He was actually talking about Anthony Cook, and this was after Anthony Cook got picked up for the Peter Sawicki murder, and Frank got him alone in the room, and Anthony's like, you know, Frank, can I ask you a question off the record? And Frank's like, well, I don't do off the record. I mean, everything you say to me is on the record. But Anthony's like, well, it's just kind of a simple question. And Frank's like, you know what? All right, you can ask me a question off the record. And he said, well, you know, if I confess to all this stuff, am I ever going to get out on parole? So he was already thinking back then about the bigger picture, that he already knew what he did, and he didn't want to give all of these confessions because he was worried that he would never get out of prison. And you saw there what Frank had said. He said, well, you've done some pretty bad stuff, Anthony. I don't think you ever will get out of prison. And here we are in 2024, and there's a possibility he could get out.
Have you talked to Anthony? I mean, does he think he ever has a chance of getting out?
You know, I actually, I did reach out to Anthony Cook, I think back in 2020, and sent him an email, and I never heard from him. I think Steve Moulton had also told me that he sent a letter, and he never heard from him either. So I have not had any contact with Anthony. As you saw in the earlier story, I did talk to Nathaniel for about 10 minutes, but Anthony, I have not.
I want to talk about the families again and all these emotions that go into this possibility. Scared and angry, I'm sure.
I mean, of course. I mean, they really are. And when we did that story back in 2020, what was really cool about that, we got all the families to come here to the station, and you know, they were able to talk to me.
Wow.
They were able to talk to me while being supported by the other family members. And that's when Cheryl also came, and Frank Stiles came. And so, you know, as heartwarming as it is, they have become really good.
So they keep in touch.
They all do keep in touch. And I mean, so they really are a great support group. And yeah.
When I did the Job piece the other day, I asked Keith Dressel's mother what she would say to him. Did you ever ask any of them what would you say to Anthony?
Yeah, you know, I did. I asked Steve that. I also asked Sharon, and Sharon had actually told me that she told me some really interesting things. She didn't ever really like to go on camera, but she's always been very vocal, like in court, and obviously she never wants to see Anthony get out, and she hopes that he does go to hell and whatever. But she told me this interesting anecdote that when she was talking about Don Backus, because Sharon's the mother of 12-year-old Don Backus, worst murder. I mean, they're all bad, but the 12-year-old is particularly horrific. And she said, you know, Dawn always trusted everybody, and she always saw the good in everybody. And Sharon told her, she's like, you know, Dawn, everybody has a lot, at least a little bit of good in them. And then she told me, she's like, boy, did I mislead her.
Wow, that's a lot for her to carry. I mean, that's how you want to be in life. You want to believe that. And I feel very badly that she carries guilt about teaching her daughter what should be a perfectly normal life lesson and an important one.
Absolutely. So I also did ask Steve, I said, if you could talk to Anthony Cook, and there is reason to believe that Anthony Cook actually could see this story, because in prison, I mean, they do have access to TVs and the internet. And so I did ask Steve, what would you tell Anthony Cook if you got the opportunity and if he sees this? And this is what he said.
I would tell him I hope he rots in hell. You know, he's going to pay for his crimes one way or another. And if he feels like he's paid for him now, wait till the next life. It's I don't think he's going to enjoy the rest of it.
Understandable.
Perfectly.
Yeah. Julia Bates, she played such a key role in this, going back to when this deal was made with the brothers. We talked a little bit about why she made that deal. She kind of felt that she had to do that.
Yeah, Julia Bates, I mean, back in 1998, I mean, we knew that Anthony Cook had killed Peter Sawicki back in 1981. So they had him on that. He's in prison for life. We knew he was involved in other murders, but witnesses also said that there was a second person with him. And they suspected it might have been Nathaniel, but they weren't exactly sure. So back in 97 or 98, Mrs. Bates was at a conference in Toledo with Stephanie Tubbs Jones, who's very well known in the Toledo area. And Stephanie was talking about the Sam Shepard case and how they used DNA to solve that case. And something went off in Mrs. Bates's head. And she said later when she went back to the hotel, she bolted upright at 3 a.m. and said, why can't we use the DNA to get the Cook brothers? We know that there's some DNA from one of the first rapes that they were involved in, but back in 1980, they couldn't use DNA. So as soon as she got back from Cleveland, you know, she reached out to Frank Stiles and said, dig up the DNA and see if we can match it to the Cooks. And it did. They were able to get hits on not only Anthony, but Nathaniel, and that is how they ended up sending Nathaniel to prison. And as part of that deal, again, you know, what an awful deal to have to make, but they're like, if you confess to all the crimes you did, we will let Nathaniel Cook out of prison in 20 years. So he went into prison in 1998. He got out in 2018. There was nothing they could do about it. It was a deal they had made. But yes, Julia Bates was very, very instrumental in this whole case, and we have some more sound from her.
Well, my message is, let's hope not. I don't think so. And it's everything that I believe. I've been doing this job for 48 years. You know, I've not seen too many that are worse than Anthony Cook, and those people are still locked up. And I think he probably will be as well. I'm fairly confident that that's what will happen.
You know, so much of a prosecutor's job, especially in a situation like this, has to be considering the families. And obviously, to make a deal like that, where we now do have a serial killer living in Toledo, but to give those families, the rest of the families who did not have the answers, who did not have confessions, that's something to weigh.
Oh, absolutely.
Because those families could have gone through life not knowing, had she not made that deal.
Yeah, and you know, Mrs. Bates actually has several pictures in her office about family members, you know, and particularly Sandra Pogorski, who was the first woman who actually survived. I mean, she was raped, but she was stabbed multiple times. So she has multiple pictures of Sandra in there. And she talked to me about, you know, being in court and all the family members holding hands and how difficult the whole thing was. And of course, Sharon, Dawn's mom, said, you know, I still feel like I betrayed Dawn by agreeing to this deal to let Nathaniel out. But we all believed in 20 years they would find another crime and he would never get out.
And maybe that can still happen. We don't know. Thanks so much for joining us today. For more exclusive content from 11 Investigates, you can go to the newscast section of WTOL 11+. For 11 Investigates, I'm Melissa Andrews, along with Brian Duggar.